So let's just get right into it. We want to give people some quick responses to how Christianity is not the white man's religion. But before we get into that, can you explain what people mean when they say Christianity is the white man's religion?
Yeah, for sure, man. And to be honest with you, it sounds like it's a pretty straightforward question, I think, for most people. And I thought that when I first jumped into apologetics, I kind of had a handle on it. But as I've been giving it more thought, it's more than just about, overt racism or something of that nature. It's more than just about, hey, I'm not trying to rock with it because it's European. And that's how people typically pitch it. I think there's a deeper story. I think that has to do with human value. I think essentially what people are saying is that they want to tap into their, Africanness that they lost during the transatlantic slave trade, cast off anything they believe to be European. And given that Christianity is associated with this system of oppression that has pressed against human value of the African descendants, at the end of the day, that's really the root of what's going on. It's about if Christianity is against my personhood, then it can't possibly be true.
That's right.
And so I think that's really the deeper story. It's not just about, pictures of white Jesus or, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But I think the undercurrent has to really do with personal value.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, with that, what is the first reason that you got that Christianity is not the white man's religion?
Well, I say all the time on my channel, I think most people are poor historians and even worse philosophers. So I think that for me, at the end of the day, we're still suffering from what I call the Farrakhan version or the bubblegum version of the history of slavery in America. Usually it's kind of this idea that, you got the slave master beating Christianity into the slave with the Bible in one hand and a bullwhip in the other. And that's kind of the end of the story. But what's crazy is, like, for me, I was really grappling with this question myself. And I just, for whatever reason, felt compelled to start reading slave narratives. I wanted to hear about their experience in their own words. And so what I found was there were these statements made by people who were enslaved and, professed to be Christians about being beaten for practicing Christianity. And that stuck out to me because I was like, well, wait a minute. I thought that it was beat into them in the story, but here are these folks talking about how they were praying and singing and things like that, praising the Lord in their quarters. And the slave masters were trying to prevent those kind of things. And so that's when I started to dig a little bit deeper. And I realized that actually for a large portion of, antebellum slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, actually a good number of slave masters opposed the preaching of the gospel to enslaved persons because they believed that, under English common law, that there was a possibility that if a slave converted, then they would have to be manumitted. They'd have to be set free. And they also believed that if somebody was converted, then they might think themselves as being equal with their slave master. They didn't want that either. Yeah. And so you actually have on record a great deal of slave masters saying, look, we're not going to allow the preaching of the gospel to the slaves because we don't want them to have some sort of leverage to argue for their equal personhood. And so that's something that I think just doesn't get talked about. And we have to really acknowledge that aspect of history as we confront these kind of claims, I think.
That's right. And I did a video probably about a year, maybe a little longer ago, about the slave Bible. They took out all the chapters and stuff that would give power to slaves, and so they took all that out, and that showed that slaves were equal value and that sort of thing too. So that is actually like a historical fact too, that coexists with what you're saying as well.
Oh, without question, absolutely.
Cool. Now, what's the second reason that Christianity is not the white man's religion?
Well, the second reason I think has to do with what I call personal resistance, right? So when we think about slavery, we tend to think about just whips, chains, forced labor and that sort of thing. But I think that one thing that's actually underappreciated is the internal oppression that African enslaved persons endured. It wasn't just that, hey, we don't like you, so we're going to make you work these fields. No, there was this prominent belief that, hey, these individuals, these beings are less than human. They don't have souls. And actually, sometimes I refer to that internal oppression as that dismemberment of the soul, separating personhood from persons. So that's kind of what they were subjected to. With that being said, with conversion, and this is documented by Dr. Albert Rabateau, Princeton I messed that up. Professor Emeritus, in Princeton, Dr. Albert Rabateau, he documents how, this conversion to Christianity was like a reclaiming of oneself from that internal oppression, as if to say that you may have my body, but you can't have my soul. And you see that, like really bleeding through in those slave narratives as they attest to, their experience. And so, it was a form of internal basically you kind of rebellion against, that slave system.
That's good. Yo, so would you say that, is there like a genetic problem here? And what I mean when I say genetic, I'm talking about like the genetic fallacy, right? You know what I mean? Or would you say that like Christianity would be the white man's religion simply because people argue that it was given to them by the white man? I mean,
yeah. So I think that's one way that people will frame it. So you do have some people who say that, well, we were beat into it and therefore it's wrong.
Right.
And so that's, obviously that's the genetic fallacy all day.
And when you say wrong, you're talking about factually wrong.
Factually incorrect, right. It's factually untrue that Jesus, rose from the dead, right. And, the whole scheme of, or framework of Christianity rather is completely false, given that, we see, that we were beat into it. And that's, clearly the genetic fallacy, because you're discrediting a worldview based upon how certain individuals came to believe it. That's a genetic fallacy textbook, right?
Yeah.
With that being said, you have others who will, kind of pose the same kind of problem, and they may not necessarily say that, well, it's false, for these reasons, but they would say that they have good reason to be suspicious of Christianity because it's to use a phrase that gets thrown around a lot. It's a handmaiden of oppression, So that one you want to kind of handle a little bit differently. I mean, we can talk all day about just the other side of the coin, where you see Christians opposing slavery and all various forms of oppression on the basis of their Christian convictions. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But
no, that's good. And so I think that's a good point to make, though. A good distinction is because even if it's true, all the stuff's true that people abused Christianity, or it came from all these different reasons. Still, with that being said, that doesn't say anything really about if Jesus really did raise from the dead, or if the Bible's true, or anything as it relates to that, or the claims in the Bible, that sort of thing too.
Yeah, and actually to that point, so I'm from Virginia, right? Mm-hmm. A couple of years ago, we had the Charlottesville riots, unfortunately, where you had some guys, marching around with the tiki torches, and unfortunately, a woman lost her life. She was run over by an individual. I think it was by a Dodge Viper or something like along those lines. Now, the reality is, even though this individual committed this heinous crime, it took somebody's life with this Dodge Viper, nobody's out boycotting Dodge. Nobody's going to stop driving. Dodge Vipers. Why? Because they understand that Dodge Viper was used for a purpose for which it was not intended. It wasn't intended to take somebody's life. And so I use that as an analogy. It's the same way with Christianity. Yeah. Just because you have individuals, using Christianity for this, ill purpose, that's not a testament to some sort of flaw about Christianity itself. That has something to do with the depravity of those individuals.
That's right.
And so I think that we have to make those kind of distinctions if we're going to think clearly about these kind of things.
Yeah, that's right. And people are going to argue that Christianity teaches slavery. I'm sure people that are probably more ignorant towards like the full context of the Bible, all the different verses and stuff, and people pull out specific verses. We don't have to get into that today. I actually did a series on slavery that's you guys can see in the playlist down on my channel. You can see if you guys want to watch more on those verses, and also link Adam's channel where there's going to be a lot more of that stuff too. Now, before we go, let's just do one more. So what is the third reason that Christianity is not the white man's religion?
Sure, man. So, well, I guess probably my favorite part, actually, I have a whole presentation on the Imago Dei and the Black experience.
Okay.
And so what you see is this notion of being made in God's image really takes root, not only among the population of enslaved persons, but also those who are saved free, maybe in the North and whatnot. And it's that concept that became sort of like a moral currency from which they were able to argue their freedom, you know what I'm saying, with the predominant culture. You know what I'm saying? Because fortunately, we live in a context where you've got the Constitution and the Emancipation Proclamation, but the independence, where you've got these themes of all men are created equal and all that kind of stuff. And so it's some bedrock, some foundation, the African enslaved persons were able to kind of tap into that was woven already into the fabric of American society, so that when they broached the conversation about their own personhood on the basis of the Imago Dei, they had somewhere for those moral claims to land, if you will. That's and right. That, allowed for them to really advocate for their freedom, and not just from slavery, but also later on down the road with the civil rights movement as well. I mean, it's just amazing. You see explicit appeals to scripture all throughout Frederick Douglass's work, Martin Delany, and just a list of other abolitionists that I could name, where they're explicitly appealing to the Imago Dei as the basis of their personhood and therefore their freedom. So, yeah.
That's right. No, man. Thanks again for coming on the channel. And everybody go subscribe to Adam Coleman's channel. I have the link down below. His channel is Tru ID. And thanks for having me here, man. So the next time that people kind of say these kind of things like Christianity is a white man's religion and stuff like that, what are you going to say?
Well, first I'm going to pull my hair out. Then I'm going to say, what do you mean?